Larry, it's always fun to have a Longhorn legend. This is maybe the best of all time because of his family heritage, his twin brother. Everything about Tom Campbell is incredible.
Look, there's some great storytellers at the University of Texas, Rooster Andrews, James Street, Ken Dabbs, but Tom Campbell ranks right up there with the best. And this is going to be a treat for the audience today.
That's true. I wish we just had a list and say, okay, Tom, here's story number 1, go. Here's story number 2, go.
Oh, I'm going to do some of that. Yeah, I'm going to do something. I'll start it off with his dad, the great Mike Campbell, Coach Royal's defensive coordinator. The last thing he told him, I think, Tom, this was after the Cotton Bowl, your senior year, your last game.
Yeah.
And he said, son, I don't know what you're going to do in life, but you need to do it on television because of his propensity to make big plays in crucial situations on TV televised games.
So I ended up with a good career and most valuable defensive player in the Cotton Bowl my junior year and made that interception against Arkansas, and he never said a word to me. No, nothing.
Nothing?
And then the Notre Dame game, and you'd think it, no, didn't say a word to me. And I'm in the locker room, and after the Notre Dame game, by the way, and I've got this, I kept the interception in the last minute of the game, and Joe Theismann final pass, and I'm keeping this dude, and I'm sitting in my locker and looking at it, and I'm saying, what am I going to do with this? And then I realized there's a pair of coach's shoes in front of me, and I think immediately it's Daddy. He's finally going to say something to me. And I look up at him, and it's not him. It's Darrell Royal. It's Coach Royal, who I've known since I was 8. And I said, oh, my gosh, Coach Royal's going to say something to me. Good. And all he did was point to the football and said, Tom, is that ball for Freddie? And I won't tell you what went through my mind. I won't say. But it was multiple 4-letter words in my brain.
So you gave the ball to Coach Royal, and he gave it to Freddie Steinmark.
Yes,
is that what happened?
So that clip is still on YouTube, and I get upset every time I see it where Coach Royal is addressing the team 1 or 2 minutes later, and he holds the football up and said, "There's a guy here we love a lot. Here's something for you, Freddie." And every time I see it, I said, he's giving my football to Steinmark.
Oh, that's great. What a story. Oh, my goodness. Tell us about your dad. And he's one of the most beloved coaches of all time in UT history. And not only growing up with him as a UT coach, and then getting to play for him. Tell us about how special that was, fun for you, and maybe hard for you.
Well, you used the wrong adverb or whatever the word is. The word was not getting to play for, it was having to play for him. First of all, Mike and I got a twin brother, Mike, and we weren't recruited by anybody coming out of high school. I mean, Daddy was good friends with the coaches at Ole Miss where he played college. His best friend, Charlie Shire, was the head coach at Mississippi State, and the best he could do was get Shire to say he'd get us a job working in the athletic dining room at Mississippi State. He couldn't get us anything, so we didn't get recruited. And finally, recruiting is over after our senior year. We're about to graduate, and we're going to UT. No one recruited us, and this is the kind of guy he was. He said he came home one night, and we said, Daddy, since we're going to UT, we got in academically barely, but we got in. We both decided we got some football left in us, and we want to walk on at Texas. And we knew how pleased he was going to be to hear that. And he looked at us and said, have you two boys lost your minds? And let me tell you, if that's not bad enough, so we told we'd walk on, and he did come up 2 weeks later or so after recruiting was over. They gave out all the scholarships they could give out, and he came in one night and said, Darrell said he had 2 scholarships left over, and you two can come out and stay as long as you want.
That's good.
Wow.
With the expectation it would not be very long.
Well, that was no problem back then in 66, 67, 68, 69. I mean, you guys had NIL money back then, right? I mean,
Mike and I were
probably got a
loaded.
little NIL money, didn't you?
Yeah, we were loaded.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen.
I know you had a deal with AstroTurf. Didn't you guys work for AstroTurf one summer?
Well, that was right before our senior year at UT. Before that, we were digging ditches and hauling rocks and stuff like that, getting paid. We got excited when our final year, we got paid $1.25 an hour.
That wasn't enough to drive a Lamborghini or Bentley or anything?
Not exactly. We got to live at home, and Mama didn't charge us for food or nothing. We got to live at home. And but the day Mama took us, freshmen couldn't have cars. Not that me or any of our teammates had automobiles anyway. By the way, my dad's nickname was Iron Mike. I'm pretty sure it was either Darren Talbert or one of the Talbert boys gave him that name, Iron Mike. But the Talberts gave my mother a nickname, Bloody Mary.
Oh, my goodness.
And she earned it.
Oh,
it was tough.
Mike touched on it. We kind of flowed pretty quickly into it and told some funny stories. But what was it like, that dynamic like? I mean, you grew up, so you're obviously, your dad worked for Coach Royal and worked with him. You guys socialized with them. So it's like when you were a little kid, you were around the Royal kids, and how did those relationships, not only with your father but with Coach Royal, as you transitioned from being a family friend to being a player for him? How was that dynamic, both with your dad and with Coach Royal?
Well, Mike and I both, it was a big shock to everyone, to both of us anyway, when we were sophomores and we both got promoted up to second team, which was far beyond anything I thought. And, but hey, nobody ever said anything to us. I never, in my junior year, I get promoted to first team. I couldn't believe it. I grew up to the depth chart, and there I am, found out that I'm first team on Monday of the Texas Tech game. That game we went up to Lubbock and got beat.
Yeah.
But I was so shocked that I actually walked into the coach's locker room and said, "Daddy," he was there. Fortunately, he was the only coach in there. "Daddy, we got a problem here." "Well, what's that, Tom?" And he's wondering, what the heck am I doing in the coach's locker room? And I said, "Well, Secretary Ruth has made a mistake." "Well, what do you mean, Tom?" I said, "She's accidentally put me on first team. And I don't want to get embarrassed when I get out on the practice field today and you have to switch me and the other guy out." And he just looked at me and said, "You mean you don't think you're good enough?" Holy cow. I'm sure I'm good enough, Daddy. Walking out of there saying, "Hell no, I'm not good enough. I don't even know what I'm doing." But I played better every week. This is my junior year, and about the sixth game, nobody, not Coach Royal, not Daddy, ever gave me any encouragement at all. "You're doing good. Keep it up." Nothing. My motivation was I didn't want to come back in there Monday afternoon and find I'm back at second team. And finally, one Sunday, about the fifth or sixth game of the year, this is the only compliment Daddy ever gave me. I go home to have lunch with Mama one Sunday, figuring Daddy wouldn't even be there, but he was. Not this big deal. He was watching a football game, and I'm sitting there watching it with him, and the phone rings. He walks over to the wall just a few steps away, and I realize he's talking to a lady. "Yes, ma'am." He said, "Yes, ma'am." Yeah. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." And I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, the mother of one of my teammates has called my father up, Iron Mike, and talking to him and giving him a rash of crap. I said, I can't believe he's listening to this. And it goes on and on. And finally, this is hard to believe, but he gave me the only compliment he ever gave me. When I heard him say this, I knew I was doing okay. He said, "Lady, I agree with you. Tom is no damn good. He's just the best one I've got."
Tom, he didn't really say that. Did he
yes,
really
he
say
did.
that?
Oh,
God is no witness.
What a backhanded compliment.
Oh.
And the truth is, I became a better player because I was no longer playing scared that I was going to have a bad game or make a bad play and get demoted.
You said they never complimented you, Coach Royal or your dad. Did they ride you harder than the other kids, though? Did you find that, or did they treat you the same?
All of my teammates would tell you that they'd say, "I can't believe y'all had to put up with this for 18 years. I can't believe you'd had to do this. You lived with him for 18 years. You know, he was just a tough guy, but we were used to it. They weren't
right.
They weren't used to it. It didn't bother us at all. That's just the way he was."
So he didn't treat you any poorly than the other guy. He treated everybody the same, is what you're saying.
Yeah. He might have been a little bit tough. My teammates thought he was tougher on Mike and I, but we didn't think so.
Really?
It didn't ever bother us. It bothered me the time we were doing a drill when trying to block punts, and I'm on the left defensive end and Mike's on the right defensive end, and we keep coming in trying to block a punt, and my dad's running the drill and nobody's blocking the punt. And Mike and I are the only two getting close, and he's getting mad at us. It's like there's nobody else on the defense. He's mad at us. But finally, Mike and I came in, and unfortunately, we had the same idea at the same time. We both came in, and we looked like it was picture day. Man, he dove out there with his arms out in front of him, and I dove out there with my arms out in front of me, and our heads collided. And his helmet came underneath my face mask and hit these two front teeth and snapped them right off.
Oh,
yeah.
So now I'm in the grass. I'm on the grass on my knees, going through the grass looking for my two front teeth, because I figured maybe a dentist can glue them back on. You know, how hard can that be? And I'm looking there and looking, and I finally found both of them, and I realized Coach's shoes are in front of me. And I look up, and it's Daddy. And this is the only time I ever called him anything other than Coach. I held my hand out, and I said, "Daddy, Mike just knocked my two front teeth out." And I'm thinking he's going to say, "Oh, my gosh, you need to get to the locker room. Go see Frank, and I'm going to get out of here." And he turned around and looked at the other, really the offense and the defense. So there's like 21 other players on the field standing around waiting for instructions. And he looked back at me and looked back to them and hollered out, "Do it again." And turned around and walked off.
Oh, my goodness.
And that's when I threw my teeth at him.
You threw your teeth at him?
Yes, I did.
Did you ever find them?
No, I never knew. They're still out there. Oh my gosh. We did it 5 more times. Mike and I ran into each other 5 more times.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And then Daddy finally sent us all into the locker room.
How competitive were you and Mike growing up with each other? I mean,
we were always real competitive, and we liked to fight. And mostly we fought each other. And but we never had a problem fighting anybody. My Daddy had a rule. He knew he liked to fight. He just said, "Make sure when you fight, it's always with someone bigger than you, and don't ever touch your little brother." And that was his rule. And so we would always take on the bullies in school. And hey, we didn't mind getting hit, but we did most of the hitting. So we were used to it. Mike and I got in a fight, only one fight there. Well, we got in 2 or 3 at UT. One of them, the story's probably too long, but he insulted my girlfriend, and I went after him and tried to. I was gonna take care of him. He ran into his dorm room and locked the door, and I couldn't get to him.
This was Mike?
Yeah, and I went back to my room, which was right next door to his. This is in Moore Hill Hall. And I'm going to get into that room, and I'm going to make him pay for insulting my girlfriend. And so I couldn't get in. So I got into my closet, and I got out my bag of golf clubs. And I went through them, and I picked out a golf club. I picked out my 8-iron. And I went over there, and I started beating on his door. I hit it about 20 times. Those doors were made really good at Moore Hill Hall. And I finally, and he's giggling behind the door, and it's just making me furious. But after 20 times, I was worn out, and I said, "Oh, to heck with it." And I went back to my room and put the club back in and forgot about it. But the next morning, I got up and walked by his door going to the showers, and there was a note. I'd hit that door at least 20 times, and there was a note that had been attached to the door. And I got up there close where I could read it, and some wiseacre had put this on the door. It said, "Winter rules, please replace all divots."
Oh, wow.
And Daddy showed up later that morning and said, "You know, you're gonna have to pay for that door." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "Well, what golf club did you use?" And I said, "Well, I used the 8-iron." "Why'd you use the 8-iron?" I said, "Well, I didn't think I'd break it." And I said, "Did you break it?" "No, I didn't break it, Daddy." And he said, "Okay, you got to pay for that door," and walked away.
Oh, wow.
Wow. What was the magic like? Tom, that was 68, 69 was your junior and senior year. You guys start running the wishbone. The offense does in 68. They stumble at first. Coach Royal makes a change at quarterback, enter James Street, and then you go on a roll. You win 20 in a row. That was a magic ride, a magic time in the history of Texas football. What was it like being there then? What was the atmosphere and the whole, was it just day to day and you guys took one game at a time, or did you know at some point, this was something special?
It took probably our 4th or 5th game when James took over, when Street took over. And bottom line is we were coming off a 6-4 season and tied Houston in our first game. And we knew Houston had a really good football team that year. So it wasn't devastating that we tied Houston, even though we were lucky the time. But it was still depressing. But let me tell you, after the Texas Tech game, even after James came in at halftime of the Texas Tech game, it was devastating because we knew we had so much talent on the football team. Most people would tell you that our 68 team had more talent than the 69 team.
Chris Gilbert, you had Gilbert on that team, yes.
Gilbert and Lloyd Wayne Scott, and there was just a lot of good talent on there, and Corby Robertson. But unfortunately, Bill Bradley was the first one to tell you he could not run the wishbone. He just couldn't run it. His brain didn't work that way. And so it took a lot of courage maybe for Coach Royal to take Bill Bradley, a senior. His nickname is Super Bill.
Yeah. He's
a captain, a senior captain, and at halftime he demotes him. A lot of people don't know this. Bill told me this. I've heard him tell it many times. He told me this recently. So we ended up losing to Texas Tech, and Bradley came in the locker room the next Sunday morning or actually he gets a manager knocks on his door early Sunday morning and said, Coach Royal wants to see you in his office. Bill goes over there and Coach Royal says, Bill wants you to know to make sure you realize we do not have a quarterback controversy here. To make sure you know about it, you're no longer a quarterback. You're now second team split in behind Cotton Spire. And that's where Bill goes that afternoon, Monday afternoon. Second team. Heck, we never throw the ball to the first team split in. He's never going to get – he's just on taking a knee. He admits he's just going to get through that season and then go pump gas in Palestine the rest of his life. And about 3 games later, Daddy stops our drills and goes down there and asks Royal, what's Bradley doing for you? And Bill says he heard him ask him, and he sprinted to the defensive end where my dad immediately made him starting right defensive halfback.
Wow.
And of course he becomes all district, gets drafted in the NFL, really as a punter.
Yeah.
He had to tell his Philadelphia coaches, I played defensive back at Texas. I can play defensive back for you. They didn't even know it. And he becomes an all-pro.
But Bradley really cemented that transition, though. He could have pouted. He could have thrown a fit. He could have been a big disruption in that locker room, but instead he went the other direction. Yeah, and kind of galvanized it. I know him and James stayed friends for the rest of their life, till James passed.
Yeah, he was a captain. He was there for the team. And James, it just all came together. James was such a character, but also such a great wishbone quarterback. The very first one, really. Yeah. Bill's mind just didn't work that way. If Bill's mind worked that way, he'd have been a fabulous wishbone quarterback.
Could you tell? He was an incredible athlete.
Could you tell in practice that the wishbone was going to be great if the quarterback got it right?
No, as a matter of fact, they introduced it, and during two-a-days in the fall of '68, and it just wasn't working in scrimmages, and there were 2 reasons why it wasn't working. One is Bill couldn't run it, but number 2, our defense was so good.
Yeah,
Corby Robertson and Mike Perrin and Leo Brooks and Bill Zapalak. That there wasn't any offense. Our defense was better than our offense. So Coach Royal, oh my gosh, he was really furious one day because it just wasn't working. But it turns out it did work. Once they got the right quarterback in, but he was concerned that this wishbone isn't working because during two-a-days and scrimmages it wasn't working at all.
I know it was tough on Royal and the coaches, but what about that great defense? Were y'all frustrated because the offense wasn't getting the job done?
Well, no, hey, we're a team. We're not sitting on the sideline blaming the offense.
Oh, that's good.
I'll tell you when we were sitting on the sideline blaming the offense against Arkansas in 1969.
Really?
Well, good gosh.
I wanted Barnes to play that clip when you guys were doing a documentary on the big shootout, and Street saw you out of the corner. They were interviewing James, and he saw you out of the corner of your eye walking in, and he said, well, the offense, we carried the day the whole game. We were waiting for and you go, and you had your famous laugh. You go, oh, my God, when you walked in. So, yeah, that was go through that big shootout. Go through that game.
Well, true. Arkansas had a really good defensive scheme. They just had a good defensive scheme, and we didn't learn how to combat it until the last 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of the game when we scored that last touchdown, and when Jim Burleson goes and blocks the wrong guy. But it turns out the guy, and he didn't block the guy he was assigned to block. He blocked another guy, a linebacker, who had been making all the tackles. Turns out he should have been blocking that guy all along.
Wow.
And but our it's just that our offense, even then, Arkansas was so good. An interesting thing about that game is they came out with an offensive scheme where they put two wide receivers to the same side, and they were both wideouts, which we'd never seen. But who'd ever 1969? You didn't see two wideouts on the same side of the field.
Now you see 2x2 all the time, you know.
Yeah. Well, the problem with us is that in our defensive scheme, I always had the widest guy as the defensive back. I would take the widest receiver, and then the second guy, which would usually be a tight end, would be covered by the rover back, who was Mike, my brother. Well, what they came out with this scheme, you go back and look at the game films and see Arkansas had this scheme where they put Chuck Dykes, their All-American wide receiver, as that second wideout. He was in the slot.
He's in the slot.
And then my dad, the most brilliant defensive mind in the country, they said, had us playing the man-to-man. They were hurting us so bad, he said, we got to go man-to-man. So now my brother Mike, a linebacker, is trying to cover their All-American number 20, Chuck Dykes, all over the field. And next thing you know, they've scored 14 points on us. And Mike is walking off the field after the second touchdown, and my dad walks up to him. And Daddy always referred to opposing players by their numbers. And he says, Mike said, you got to get closer to that number 20. Meaning you're not doing a very good job of covering him. But that was my dad's way of describing things. You got to get closer to that number 20. And Mike said, Daddy, I've gotten as close to number 20 as I'm going to get. And that's when my dad, the most brilliant defensive coach in the country, says, well, what are we going to do then?
Yeah.
And Mike said, we got to get out of this man-to-man. I can cover Dykes number 20 in my zone, but I can't cover him all over the field. So we didn't play man-to-man the rest of the game. Wow. They didn't score another point.
Well, there were a number of big plays in that game, but one came early. They had scored another touchdown early, and there was an offensive pass interference. It's a funny story and a good story too. I think they illegally hit you or blocked you. Dykes scored another touchdown. They called it back, but it was a delayed call. Tell us about that.
It's really was even at that time, it was just staggering. But they call a pass and the quarterback's looking for a receiver, but the guy I'm covering isn't. They call it an audible, and this guy I'm covering keeps coming out blocking on me. And then the quarterback throws the ball, guy catches it, runs for a touchdown. Well, while that ball was in the air, he tries to block me again. But now they're in the end zone, literally celebrating. I'm getting ready to jog to our end zone and for the extra point when I realize this referee is looking at me. And he's and the Arkansas player is there too. And it's all, and I thought, why is he looking at me? And just a light bulb went off in my mind. It's hard to believe this. So I pointed to that guy and I said, ref, this guy's blocking at me when the ball's in the air. That's offensive pass interference. And I'm not lying. They are in the end zone celebrating while I'm saying this. Wow. And the guy says, you're right. And he takes the flag out and puts it on the ground.
Wow.
And the Arkansas coaches just went ballistic on the sideline because we were near their sideline. They just went crazy. They called it back. And they added on 15-yard penalty. And on the next play, we sacked them, and they basically took 7 points off the scoreboard. And, would they have scored again after that? Probably, but probably 25, 30 years went by, and I ran into Coach Royal at a reunion, and I told him that story. And he said, really? He said, I never knew that. No one ever even looked at the game films. Not even Coach Akers, our defensive back, ever came up to me and said, "What did you say to that ref? What went on out there?" Nobody ever asked.
Wow.
And I never thought about it. But for whatever reason, I mentioned that to Royal, and he said, "I never knew that." Well, he comes up to me 2 or 3 years later when I was with him, and he said, "You know that story you told me?" "Yes, sir." He said, "Tom, I didn't believe you." "You didn't believe me, Coach?" "Tom, how can I believe you? You told me that a ref did something that's never happened in football. You got him to throw a penalty flag after the play is over." And he said, "So I went and found the game film. I found the film, and I couldn't believe it, Tom. It happened exactly the way you described it." And so I told that to Jim Dent when he was writing the book about Freddie Steinmark, Courage Beyond the Game, and Jim put it in the book. I wish I had that game film. Coach Royal went and found it. I wish I'd have got it for posterity. But Coach Royal even called the director. This is 30 or 40 years later. He calls the director of officials, Shorty Lawson, and said, "Did you know this happened, Shorty?" Shorty said, "BS, Darrell. My guys never would have done anything like that." And Coach Royal said, "I've got it on film, Shorty. I've got it on film."
Wow.
And I'm just saying that would have made the score 14-0 in the second quarter. We hadn't figured anything out.
Right. Because then you make the comeback, the offense gets going, they score the 2 touchdowns, go for 2 the first one, kick the extra, Happy Feller kicks the extra point, take a 15-14 lead. And then here comes Montgomery and Dykes right back down the field driving again. And then Tom Campbell goes into TV mode right once again and steps in front of a pass to save the day and put it on ice. Take us through that play and that sequence when you intercepted the pass to basically end the game.
On that play, they'd gotten down to about our 30, 35, maybe 40-yard line, and they had a minute to go in the game, one more good pass, and they're in field goal range. And we had finally gone back at playing man-to-man because we just could not afford. We had to fight for every yard. We just couldn't give them a 10-yard pass all the way down the field. So this is really ironic. Arkansas comes out in that place, so we're playing man-to-man. And we also knew that they were out of timeouts. And a lot of people don't realize that they were out of timeouts. They don't take that into consideration, but they were out of timeouts. And so they had to throw the ball toward the sideline. They could not just throw the ball across the middle or a button hook or something like that and run out of clock. So we knew they were going to go for the sideline. So I was playing my guy real tight.
What was that, Dykes, or was that another? Who's the intended receiver?
This is where it really gets juicy because sure enough, it was that other guy, the same one that I got the penalty called on. I can't remember his name at the moment. But I'm covering him wide. But sure enough, they had number 20, Chuck Dykes, in that slot, and he was what's the quarterback's name?
Montgomery, Bill
Montgomery. That was his go-to receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened? 2 things happened. Number one, Mike finally had Dykes covered on that play. Mike is still upset about it to this day because if he had thrown it to Dykes, Mike would have intercepted the pass in his mind. But since Mike had Dykes covered, he had to go to his number 2 receiver, which was my guy. And the truth is, it was an easy interception because both of us, I was right next to him. I turned around. When I turned and looked, the ball was on the way. I put my hands out, and so did the Arkansas guy. And so there were 4 hands on the ball, and I yanked it out of his hands. I had a stronger position. Just yanked it right out of his arms and fell to the ground.
That's where all those fights with Mike came in handy right there. No way that guy was wrestling that ball away from you.
Yeah.
Now, did you get to keep that football? I mean, or did Coach Royal take that one too? I mean,
No, like a dope, I threw it up in the air and teammates started hugging me and this and that. I don't know. I'll bet you Street probably has that ball.
Yeah, we all know that is the game of the century, but did you have any idea at the time how big that was? Did you care that the president was there? What was the attitude other than just getting the big win over Arkansas?
We didn't think. I have to admit, during the game, I can't tell you that I knew that Nixon was there. I think I remember early in the game that helicopter flying in, but I didn't know. Didn't even think during the game that anybody of any notoriety was there until it was probably in the second or third quarter when I was on the bench. The offense was on the field, and I was just standing up, walking around, and things were not going good. And in my mind, we're down 14-0, and in my mind, well, we're going to go to the Sugar Bowl. The loser was going to go to the Sugar Bowl and play Ole Miss. And in my mind, I said, well, we're going to the Sugar Bowl, and at least I get to play against Ole Miss, who didn't offer me a scholarship when I wanted one. And about that time, I look up, and who is walking down our sideline? I couldn't believe it. Walking right towards me was Colonel Sanders.
No way.
Yes.
Chicken Man.
Colonel Sanders. And while we're down 14-0, I see him coming.
Wait a minute. The heck with Billy Graham and Richard Nixon? You had the Colonel on the sideline.
Of course.
Was he in his white? Was he in his white suit?
Right, he was in his all whites.
Yeah. Did he have a bucket of chicken?
No, he didn't have chicken.
Original recipe?
Yeah, original. Yeah.
So I had no choice. I had to walk up to him and stuck my hand out. Hello, Colonel Sanders. And he said, hello there. And then he just kept walking.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, that's great. Hey, obviously that was a big moment, but tell us another big moment. I think it was the same year, was the TCU game where you got set up on the blind date.
Oh, should I tell this?
Yes, you got to tell the TCU blind date story. Yeah.
Well, on Monday, we played TCU in Austin on Saturday afternoon. But on Monday, a teammate comes up to me and says, Tom, I got a good friend. She's a TCU cheerleader, and she'd like to do something Saturday night after the game. Would you like to go out with a TCU cheerleader? And I said, dang right, absolutely. Count me in. And by the way, we beat them like 69-6 or something like that. I didn't even play the second half, but on the first half, man, whenever we were near the TCU chair sideline, I'm rolling, getting up slow off the ground, checking out all the girls. They were
which
all
one could
good.
It be? Yeah. Which one could it be?
It didn't matter. I didn't care which one. So the game ends, and I get cleaned up and go to the dormitory to pick her up, and I go into this big room and call her all on the phone, and I'm the only one in this big room where the girls would come down, and I'm the only one there, and this girl comes out. She said, I'll be right there, and she comes out, and a door opens across from me and starts walking towards me, and I'm thinking, well, this ain't her. This must be her roommate. She's running late or something like that. She keeps walking over to me, and she finally gets rid. This girl is kind of short and kind of wide, bushy hair. I'm thinking, this ain't right. And she walks up to me and she says, are you Tom? And I came this close to saying, well, no, I'm Mike. But I couldn't do it. And I said, well, yeah, well, I'm Susie. And I think, God dog it, I am going to kick that guy. Wait till tomorrow when I see this guy. But I'm a gentleman, so we went, and all my teammates were heading out to the Fiji Lake Hut. drink beer and sit out there over the lake, town lake, and so that's what we did. Went and got us a couple of 6-pack of beer, and I have to I kept asking myself, how did this happen? What happened here? And finally, the sun is going down, and I'm sitting next to this short, stubby girl with a bushy hair, and I finally said, well, I understand, Susie, that you're a cheerleader. And she said, yes, I am. And I said, well, Susie, I got to tell you, I was over there a number of times on the sideline, and I got to tell you, I didn't see you. And she said, oh, Tom, you wouldn't have seen me. I was wearing the horn frog costume.
Oh, that's great.
Oh,
that's great.
I mean, who can say they've been out with the TCU mascot? I mean, that's great, Tom. Did you ever see her again? Did you ever see her again?
Never saw her again. We had a good time. I took her back to the dormitory that evening, and I never said anything to anybody. She was a nice girl.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's classic.
Yeah, but what was the toughest thing was come Monday when I had to answer the questions from my girlfriend. What happened to me Saturday night? I had a girlfriend at the time.
Oh, wow.
You traded her in on the horn frog. Yes, you were the horn frog. You had a better deal. Yeah, the horn frog. Hey, you touched on it a while ago. Courage of the Game, Jim Dent, and then Mile American, which they made the movie Mile American about the Freddie Steinmark story. You were instrumental in that. Take us through some of that stuff. Both were you involved with the book? I know the movie you were heavily involved, but
I was in only to the extent that Jim Dent called us. He got the idea of writing this book from that Terry Fry book called Horns and Hogs or something like that.
Right.
It was a good book, and Jim read that book, so this is many years later. He got the idea from that book that he wanted to write a book about Freddie Steinmark. So he started calling all of us, and he started coming to Austin to interview us. And he went down to Houston, interviewed the guys down there, my brother Mike, and all those guys down there. That's how it all came about. And it was just an exceptional book.
How emotional was that time because of what Freddie was going through?
We had that in the movie Mile American. They did a good job of representing of that meeting Coach Royal called when he had to tell us all that Freddie had this cancer and they were going to have to amputate his leg. It was just unbelievable moment in time. Just very dramatic, very emotional. We just couldn't believe it. Of course, Freddie wasn't there. He was in Houston. But hey, the next day we're getting ready for Notre Dame. And I got to tell you, I don't think that we much thought about Freddie. Other than individually, we didn't talk about it. We had to get ready for Notre Dame. We'd already won the national championship, but we didn't want to lose to Notre Dame, and that's what we had to focus on. And so come the day of the game, we're in our locker room about 10 or 15 minutes ready to go out on the field when all of a sudden the locker room door walks in and in walks Freddie. We weren't expecting that. It's so good in the movie. And Freddie comes in the locker room and he walks over. His locker was right next to me and Danny Lester, and his uniform was in the locker.
Wow.
So he starts ambling over on his crutches, and of course he only had one leg. He didn't have a prosthesis at that time, and comes over there. What do you say? Golly, we weren't expecting it. And it's such But what do you say? I'm thinking, my gosh, what do you say to him? And he sits down in his locker and he's looking up at me and while he's putting his shoe on, and I'm thinking, what can I say to Freddie? And this is the only thing that could come to my mind. I looked at Freddie and I said, God dang, Freddie, couldn't you have waited 3 weeks before having your leg amputated?
Damn, Mike.
And Freddie just looked at me and he started laughing.
Did he? That's good.
He would have, by the way, if the doctors would have let him wait 3 weeks, he would have waited 3 weeks. I guarantee you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, he was a tough guy.
We've heard about how tough it was playing in that Arkansas game.
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't ever know he had any kind of an injury.
Yeah. He didn't tell anybody.
No, he was never late for practice.
Amazing.
He was getting massages and stuff like that. I never knew he was injured or hurting until in that Arkansas game. We're deep in the fourth quarter, halfway through it, I'm guessing, and they throw a pass, and that's when Freddie, it's in the movie,
he reaches out and grabs him
and actually tackles Chuck Dykers, who's about to run by him. His leg just gave out on him at that moment. He tried to cut and run, and it just quit on him. And he reached out and tackled him, which saved a for sure the winning touchdown. And but I don't know any of this. I'm covering my guy, and the next thing I know is a penalty. We're walking back to our 7-yard line. We're in the defensive huddle, and we know if they just kick a field goal, they're going to win the national championship. And I turned to say something to Freddie. And it's not Freddie. It was Rick Neighbors, who, none of us had been in a situation like that ever in our lives. But Rick Neighbors had come from, I think, Tyler Junior College the year before. He hadn't even played down in that game or in any situation like that. I looked at him, and Rick looked nervous. And I looked at Rick, and I said, what the hell are you doing in here? And he said, I don't know. The coaches just told me to come in. And I'm thinking, replace for Steinmark? But then you got to get back to business. And, Rick played the rest of the game. They didn't score again. And we found out the next week what was wrong with him.
So you really feel like the movie, those couple of scenes really captured that. What Coach Royal telling you guys, and then some of the other scenes, the movie scene was comparable to the real life deal when Freddie walked into the locker room and you guys had not seen him in 3 weeks.
It was really good. It was a fabulous thing. I was the movie consultant on the movie, but when that scene was being filmed, I was sitting back in a chair next to the director and the producer and Angelo Pizzo, and then I can't remember, was he the director and his other guys the producer, whatever. And they filmed this scene about 4 or 5 times, and the scene would be over, and they say cut, and they said do it, we'll do it again. And finally, after I don't know, maybe the 4th one, I'm sitting there, and it's so emotional. I'm sitting next to these guys, just on in a soundproof room, and finally they said cut. And I'm sitting there, and I'm emotionally distraught. And I took off my headset and threw it down, and I said, "Son of a bitch, I can't watch this anymore." And I walked out. And that's when the director saw me walking out and said, "That's a cut. No more. We're done.
Wow.
We don't need another one." And that was it. It was just so cotton picking emotional. I've got a fabulous photograph of I think it was the producer giving Edith Royal a hug. Right, she was watching this scene being filmed, and so I've got a photograph of that. I don't remember who took it.
talking about emotion, take us back to 1976 in December and getting ready to play an Arkansas game, and your dad was the still defensive coordinator, and Coach Royal decides it's his last game.
Well, Daddy'd been coaching 20 years. I was living back in, I was still in Corpus Christi. I was down in McAllen. I'm a long way from all of that anyway. I wasn't part of it. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't expected to be my dad's last football game by any stretch of the imagination. So it's just that Coach Royal was retiring, and after that, everyone expected my dad to be the next head coach.
Mm-hmm.
So did Coach Royal. Politics got in the way. It wasn't emotional at that moment for me because my dad's career was over, because I didn't think it was over. He's going to be the next head coach.
Yeah. And
he's still a young guy. He's only 54, 55. He can go coach somewhere else if they don't want to hire him, if he wants to. So that itself wasn't a big deal. That day when they announced that Fred Akers was going to be the next coach, that was a big deal for all of us.
How did you find out? Back in the pre-internet days, when it was a matter of having to get it from radio or TV.
Mike, since you asked that, actually about 2 or 3 days before that in McAllen, the guy, the sportscaster from, I don't remember his name, over in Weslaco, where the main TV station down there was, called me up. He wanted some inside information. What's the scoop, Tom? What do you know? Yeah. And if I'd have known anything, I would have told him. I said, Joe, I don't have any idea. I don't know if they're going to hire Daddy or not. I said, I do not know. And he said, come on, Tom, I know you got to know. I do not know. And I didn't know what the intrigue that was going on in Austin and the political stuff that was going on. Mm-hmm. And it was all a political thing orchestrated by Frank Irwin.
Yep.
And it wasn't that he had anything against my dad, but he had something going against Darrell Royal, that was the problem.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, it's plenty of years later, Frank Irwin came to my dad's house and said, are you going to be a Darrell Royal man, or who's going to be the athletic director? That's who hires coaches, right? You're going to be a Darrell Royal man or a Frank Irwin man? And he said, I'm going to be a Darrell Royal man, Frank. He's my best friend. I'm never turning my back on Darrell. And little did he know that was it for him.
Wow.
Interesting. So did your dad, he pretty much stayed retired. He did some little league stuff and things of that nature. And he was always very gracious. When I was playing baseball at Texas, I played with Link Hudson. Link played with me a year. And so Jim and my dad became friends.
Oh, yeah.
And so Jim would take me and Dad to lunch with Coach Campbell. Sometimes Earl would be there. Sometimes Coach Royal would be there. So we went 4, 5, 6 times. And he was always so gracious. And, of course, I just sit back and listen to stories. And, of course, Jim and your dad would argue about the 63 when he took Jim out.
Yeah.
And put Carlisle in at safety and made that play against Baylor, yada, yada, yada. So it was always just fascinating to me to sit back and listen to the stories. But your father was always so gracious, around me, in his later years. That was in the late 80s. So.
Yeah, he was. He took his football serious. So Jim Hudson had asked him to help him coach the Little League.
It's a good story.
I guess Link was on that team.
Yeah.
And in a game, Jim was the head coach. It's Little League football. It's probably flag, but I don't know for sure. But anyway, it got to be a 4th down. This is a true story. Daddy told me this. It's 4th down. Daddy's running the defense, and it's 4th down. and got to punt the football. It's 4th down, and Jim Hudson comes over to Mike and my dad and says, "Mike, well, we're not gonna punt it on 4th down. We're gonna go for it." He said, "Hudson, it's 4th down. It's a long way to get a 1st down. We're not going for it. It's 4th down. We're kicking the ball. This is Little League football." And Hudson says, "No, Mike, we're going to go for it," and turns around and walks away, in which time my dad put his clipboard down and walked off the field.
No.
Yeah.
And his coaching career was over.
Wow.
And people might not know, Jim Hudson was a great player at Texas, was Joe Namath's roommate with the Jets, won a Super Bowl. I think had an interception or two in that Super Bowl. I think it's Super Bowl III when the Jets upset the Colts. So he was a great player and a great, football man too. So that's pretty fun. Tell the story, the 63 story. We're playing Baylor at the end of the season. Carlisle, who was the quarterback, and Jim was playing defense, but he took him out on a series because your dad had a gut instinct. And Jim always argued to the day that they both passed about, "You shouldn't have taken me out. I played with the Jets, blah, 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 blah." That's a good story too.
This went on the rest of Jim's and my dad's life.
Yeah.
They got to go with lunch with all of their crowd.
Oh, yeah.
There was never a time went by when it's sometime during lunch, Hudson would say, "Mike, you shouldn't have taken me out of the game. That game. Why did you take me out of the game?" And Daddy would say the same thing every time, because he said, "Cause Jim, I knew you couldn't get there," meaning he couldn't get all the way to the sideline. He just had a hunch they were going to throw a long pass. It was going to be all the way to the sideline, and he knew, as good as Hudson was, he could not get to the sideline from his position. And here's Carlisle, who hadn't played defensive back for a couple of years. They throws him in the game as safety, and Carlisle makes an interception. And guess what? Hudson would not have got there. But it didn't matter. Jim would never. He just had to bring it up every time.
Oh.
He had to bring it up.
Your dad knew, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He would take people out and put people in just for strange reasons you didn't know.
I think that's a quality in a great coach. They have unique instincts that other coaches don't have, and they can make those moves and pull that trigger at the right time, and come out smelling like a rose.
Oh yeah, yeah. By the way, this is off the subject somewhat because we're talking about us getting started. To tell you the truth, our mother gave us more motivation to play than my dad did. And the day, her nickname being Bloody Mary, it was not fun to grow up with. But she had to, she knew we liked to fight, and she was tough on us. And so the day she drove us down to Moore Hill Hall, Mike and I'm sitting in the back seat, Mike's sitting in the front seat. She parks the car in front of Moore Hill Hall. We get out of the car and walk around the trunk, get our bags, and she says, "Boys, come over here." And we come over to the window where we know Mama's getting ready to give us some good motherly advice. And she looked at us and said, "Boys, keep in mind, Vietnam was going on. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world." She says, "Boys, don't quit because you can't come home." and she meant it. So that was all the motivation we ever needed to not quit.
Kept you motivated.
As a walk-on.
Oh, my goodness.
That's great.
It had nothing to do with my dad, because neither Mike or I wanted to go live with Mama any more than we had to. We lived with her during the summer. That was enough.
Oh, my goodness.
She meant it. You won't be able to come home if you quit. You'll have to go join the Marines.
That's great.
Anyway, they were both good mothers and fathers.
Any other Coach Royal stories? I mean, you again. I keep going back to this, but you knew him in a way like the other players didn't. You knew him from the time you were 5, 6 years old or were born or whatever. You know.
Yeah, but ironically enough, people ask me that all the time, and the only conversation I've ever had with Coach Royal, the only time I ever had one was I had two of them. One is when he took the football away from me, and the other one was Mike and I. We weren't doing anything wrong, but another player of ours got in trouble and was drinking and caused a scene and got called. We all three got called up into Coach Royal's office, and he asked us if we'd been drinking. The answer was no. But this other guy, this other player, had caused a scene, and there was not that big of a deal. But anyway, but it's no fun. Let me tell you, that's being in Darrell Royal's office made you feel nervous. There's no way you could sit in his across the table from him and think anything good is going to come out of this. But it all worked out. But honestly, I just look back and realize the only time I ever talked to him was that time I told him the story about the getting the referee to call the penalty. And that was just
Coach Royal, he was an intimidating presence, wasn't he? In a sense, just his status and who he was.
Yeah. Growing up, we were friends with the Royal family, and we'd go to their house all the time. But it's not like I went over there and had conversation with Darrell Royal. You know, we're just over there playing with their kids, Mac and David. And we hoped their good-looking sister Marion was going to be there.
And not in the TCU mascot uniform.
No.
That's funny about Coach Royal. Again, a couple times at lunch, maybe once or twice at lunch, he was there, like I was saying with Jim. And then the other time that I was around him a little bit, I was in the Woodlands. I was with David Hall. We were at some charity deal. We're at some resort hotel ballroom thing. And so the deal kind of is coming to an end. And Hall comes back over the table. He said, "Hey, we've been invited up to Coach Royal's suite to listen to some picking, some music." And I think it was Willie. The next part of this, I was so scared. I don't even know who it was, but I was pretty sure it was Willie Nelson was going to play up there. So we go up to suite. There's only about 20 people up there. And we're about to walk in, and Hall says, "The only rule is, Lowery, you cannot speak when you're in here. He will kick you out."
Yeah.
So I go in there, and I'm like not breathing. I'm not looking. I mean, I'm terrified of Coach Royal. He kind of looked back when we opened the door, and you didn't breathe hard. You didn't do anything. You say a word. Because he loved his music, and he wanted anyone talking. That was his rule. He couldn't talk, couldn't be asked, nothing. You'd sit there and listen if you were invited to something like that. So he was an intimidating presence. He really was.
Mom and Daddy lived out at Onion Creek, only a few minutes away from the Royals. They lived at Onion Creek. And I was up from Corpus Christi one time, and it was a Friday night, and Daddy said, "Come on, we're going over to Darrell's. He's going to be some music over there, some picking." And I said, "Okay." And sure enough, I think he turned his garage into a auditorium practically, soundproof and this and that. And anyway, we were sitting in there. And it was really good. I don't remember who it was. It wasn't Willie Nelson, but it was a really good singer. And listen to this. And there were 20 or 30 people in there. But Daddy had told me, make sure you don't do any talking while we're in here. And it was fabulous. The guy had sung one or two songs. He's a well-known singer. And all of a sudden, after about the second song, my dad turned to me and tapped me on the arm and said, "All right, let's go." I said, "What do you mean, let's go?" He said, "I've heard enough. Let's go." Daddy just didn't like that sitting there listening to music. He wanted to talk and have some conversations. I said, "I can't believe it. I'm leaving. I'm having to leave this." And out we walked.
So funny that he and Coach Royal so close, but so different in so many ways.
Yeah. Yep. Daddy liked country music, but he liked to be able to chat with someone at the same time.
Sure.
Coach Royal was serious about his country music. You know, I just thought of something. I did have another conversation with Coach Royal, and it was in 1968. And we had played a Saturday night game, and there was a country music singer going to be coming and performing at the Broken Spoke. That it opened up a few months earlier. The Broken Spoke, it hadn't been open a year. And I heard this singer was going to be at the Broken Spoke, and I wanted to go, but we had on Sunday night, we had a 10 o'clock curfew. Be in your room at 10 and lights out at 10:30, and they were serious about it. And so we had won the game, and I actually went up to Coach Royal and I said, "Coach, there's a country music singer going to be playing at the Broken Spoke, and I'd like to go see him, but he won't even probably start till 10 o'clock, 9:30 or 10. And I said, if you'll let me go, I'll be in my room by midnight. I'm not going to drink any beer or anything like that. I just want to go see this guy sing." And he said, "Well, who's the singer?" And I said, "A guy named Willie Nelson." And Coach Royal looked at me and said, "I've never heard of him." And I said, "Well, he's really good, Coach. He's really good." And he said, "All right, but be at your room by midnight and no alcohol." Okay. And so I did. And that was that. He did not know.
That was after a game?
It was after a game.
Oh.
Before the coaches got out of the locker room.
But then him and Willie became real close.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It was about 2 years later. It was after my football was over. I go to a debutante party, and I'm in a tuxedo, and I go into this big room, and there's Coach Royal with probably a coat and tie on and no tuxedo, and there is Willie Nelson. He's sitting there talking to Willie, and Willie is dressed just the way he sang. And I go up there and I coach, and he introduces me to Willie, and then I told Willie the story. You know, Willie, 3 years ago, Coach Royal didn't know who you were. And listen, I could tell that Coach Royal was not amused.
You let the cat out of the bag.
Oh, you told the story in front of Coach Royal.
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
You know, Willie Nelson was a pretty good high school quarterback.
Was he?
He's
I didn't know that.
out in West Texas, somewhere like 1A, 2A size school. Pretty good athlete.
He's from Abbott, right?
Yeah, that's
Wow,
right. You're right.
Gosh,
That's great.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, that was pretty funny. That was pretty funny.
Tom Campbell, the reason why Darrell Royal found out about Willie Nelson to begin with.
If it wasn't for me,
You get all the credit.
That's the trade-off for the football. He took the football and he took Willie from him. I mean, it's unbelievable.
That's
yeah,
right. That's right.
yeah, I'd like to have that football back. Years later, I did run into Steinmark, and I said, "Freddie, can I have my football back now?" No, it was only a few months later.
Yeah.
And he just started laughing.
Oh, wow. Tom, you have so many great stories. Maybe we have to do this again just to get part two. Because you are amazing. It's so good to have you on a
lot of fun
in the box seats with Lowery and Barnes. Thank you so much.
That was good. Thanks, guys.